More moviegoers in 2024 may know The Omen by reputation than from first-hand experience. Not that the 1976 horror classic about a little boy who turns out to be the Antichrist isn't a great movie. It's just that, despite spawning multiple sequels and revival attempts, The Omen hasn't had the same pop culture resonance or staying power as, say, its contemporary The Exorcist. So the prospect of an in-canon prequel to the original film feels a bit strange, and yet that prequel, The First Omen, works, thanks to a clear directorial vision, a strong central performance, and some gnarly visuals.
There's this girl at the orphanage. I think that she really needs someone to look out for her.
This is one hell of a calling card, pun intended, for director and co-writer Arkasha Stevenson, who makes her feature debut here chronicling the harrowing ordeal that befalls young American novitiate Margaret in a Roman orphanage. The film goes all in on its dark storyline and imagery as Margaret, played by Nell Tiger, forges a connection with the teenage Carlita, played by Nicole Sarace. Carlita is a particularly troubled orphan who's prone to violence, reminding her newfound protector of her own turbulent childhood. As ominous signs and strange behavior swirl around Carlita, Stevenson and cinematographer Aaron Morton provide a technical flair that evokes the cinema of the First Omen's 1970s period setting. But they don't try to mimic that style from start to finish, though obliged to lay the groundwork for 50 years of movies and TV shows about the sinister Damien Thorne. Stevenson's movie is, thankfully, allowed to have its own identity.
What does any of this have to do with Carlita?
It's evident in the standout sequence where Margaret joins her roommate, Luce, for a night of rather un-nun-like behavior. Stevenson and Morton stylishly capture Margaret's buzzed point of view and state of mind in the midst of a busy Italian club whose atmosphere grows menacing and unsettling. It's a welcome escalation in a story that begins sluggishly but picks up momentum in its second half. The First Omen can also be a rough watch at points, delving even deeper into motifs and analogies of bodily autonomy than the recently released, similarly themed Immaculate. Yet Stevenson's depiction of a woman's body being controlled and invaded by others doesn't feel exploitative as much as it is forthright about the horror of Margaret and Carlita's predicament. There are also fun and effective jump scares and memorable, suitably creepy moments throughout, plus one shot so graphic that Stevenson says it nearly led to an NC-17 rating. You'll know it when you see it. The First Omen leans into the franchise's proto-Final Destination legacy. People who get too close to stopping Damien in these movies tend to meet intricately grisly ends, either by accident or by their own hand, and that remains true even before the spooky little kid is born. This string of often grimly funny and macabre deaths kicks off in the very first scene, which deftly sets up a big, dangerous object that quickly turns lethal. It's great that the First Omen keeps this tradition alive, even if its callback to the Omen's iconic "It's all for you" sequence feels a little bit forced.
It's all for you.
The cast are all very good, but this is an especially terrific spotlight for Free. The Game of Thrones and Servant alum is excellent here, in a role that asks quite a lot of her. Margaret is a woman of faith, doing her best to lead a pious existence despite some curiosity about a more conventional path in life. The events of the First Omen put her through the ringer, both emotionally and physically, and Free skillfully conveys all of these challenges and how Margaret changes to meet them. Veteran actors Sonia Braga and Bill Nighy exude expected gravitas as church leaders, and Maria Caballero brings the right edgy yet likable vibe to Luce, who is determined to push the boundaries of novitiate behavior. Sriracha manages to combine the unsettling yet vulnerable traits that help Margaret connect with Carlita, while Ralph Ineson also brings some great frenetic energy as Father Brennan, who has quite a bit of important information for Margaret about what is occurring and why.
You must be very careful, Margaret.
Brennan is also notable as the one major character connection to the original Omen, where Patrick Troughton played the role of the priest who desperately tries to warn Gregory Peck's Robert Thorne that, whoops, he's adopted the Antichrist. In that regard, the end of the First Omen is both amusing and also slightly eye-roll inducing. It looks to both seamlessly lead into the original's events and set up further entries in the franchise, all without contradicting the events of the earlier films. There's definitely some silliness at play in how these elements are intertwined, but there's also something entertaining in the realization that, of course, Disney and 20th Century Studios wouldn't go through all the trouble of reviving the Omen without plans for making more of them.
This church has maintained power for thousands of years. They will stop at nothing to keep it down. that way.
The First Omen manages to serve as a well-made prequel as well as an unsettling and creepy horror film in its own right. It takes a while to get going, and the very end bends backwards pretty far to set up potential follow-ups, but the brunt of the movie is very strong. Lead Nell Tiger and director Arkasha Stevenson both cement themselves as stars on the rise. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of Godzilla Kong: The New Empire and Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. And for everything else, stick with IGN.